Hey guys, Buildzoid here. I am back from my vacation, though I personally don't consider it much of a vacation because it kind of sucked, because I didn't have all of my lovely hardware with me. But I am back now. So I figured since I'm back from vacation and there hasn't been a video for a while, I'd just do one of these channel updates again. And so we're going to go over what kind of things we're going to be seeing in the coming months, as well as just stuff I wanted to address. First up, Kaby Lake is coming out very, very soon. And I am super excited because we've all seen the leaks about Kaby Lake. It does 5 gigahertz easily on water cooling. If you delid the CPUs, you'll be able to go over 5 gigahertz very, very easily. Not a major issue there. So yeah, on LN2, we're looking at 6.5 gigahertz up. So far, most of the few submissions I've seen is Splave has posted scores, and even for Cinebench, he's doing well over 6.7 gigahertz. So I don't think there's going to be many Kaby Lake CPUs that won't be doing the 6 gigahertz range, which is a huge deal because on Skylake, getting into that, sometimes you could get CPUs that didn't really do much above 6 gigahertz. Well, actually, most of them didn't do much over 6 gigahertz. It was like 6.4. So 6.4 was just about average on Skylake on LN2. So Kaby Lake is a huge step up from that, and that makes it a great architecture for LN2. And it's just so exciting because you're also getting, finally, like a cheap option for LN2 overclocking from Intel. You're finally getting the i3-7350K. I mean, yes, we had the G3258 in the past. The G3258, which is the Pentium, always kind of sucked. It wasn't very high performance. The i3-7350K, on the other hand, well, it's actually competitive with the rest of the Intel CPUs. It's competitive in the different hardware bot categories. It's a good CPU for like starting out on LN2, and it has no cold bug, so it's actually very easy to handle on LN2. It's not, as complicated as Haswell, where you have to get a very specific voltage, a very specific temperature. So yeah, I'm very happy with what we're going to be seeing from Kaby Lake. A lot of people are upset about the no IPC increase, but here's the thing. If the CPU does the same number of instructions per clock and it clocks 300 megahertz higher, that's still progress in terms of overall performance, which is why I don't have a problem with Kaby Lake. It clocks way better than Skylake, so it performs better than Skylake if you overclock. And also, if you really want to overclock, I do recommend a delid tool because the temperatures for Kaby Lake that I've seen so far are just absolutely insane when you try to get that 5 gigahertz or higher overclock. So yeah, and other than that, Kaby Lake doesn't have the thermal paste cracking issue that Skylake did, where if you had a Skylake CPU and you were, going from idle to full benchmark load, so we're saying like idle desktop Windows to like Cinebench running, you could occasionally get the thermal paste just disconnecting from the CPU die, and then your temperatures would shoot up and the system would crash and you'd be kind of screwed. And the reason that happened was like Skylake's, the die of the Skylake CPUs is just so small. Like it's a really, really small piece of silicon, so it's actually really hard to, so when there's that big thermal transient, it's hard to carry heat from something that small and causes rapid expansion and just screws up the thermal paste. Kaby Lake doesn't do that because the die is a small amount larger than the die for Skylake. So yeah, Kaby Lake is a great architecture for LN2. Also there's that i3, the 7350K, so you now have a budget LN2 overclocking option from Intel. So I'm super excited for Kaby Lake, and in terms of content you'll be seeing from me for Kaby Lake, well, first things first, I am going to be getting one of these lovely motherboards. So this is the Maximus IX Apex. This is going to replace I guess it replaces the Maximus Extreme series. So, and this is honestly like a good replacement in my opinion. So first of all, we've got 2 memory slots, which is just a huge deal for memory overclocking. There was a lot of guys who would just use the Maximus 8 Impact for all of their Skylake overclocking because the Impact only has 2 memory slots, being a mini ITX board, and so the Impact actually clocks memory way better than pretty much the rest of the entire rest of the ROG motherboard lineup, as well as better than like say, well, actually any 4 DIMM every single 4-DIMM motherboard clocks worse than a Maximus 8 Impact. And then, of course, you had like the Z170 SoC LN2 motherboard from Gigabyte. That's also a 2-slot board. Then you have the MOCF, so the MOC formula from ASRock. That's also a 2-slot board. So basically, all of the hardcore OC boards have always had 2 slots. The only one that doesn't have it was the Maximus Extreme series. They never got 2 slots on those boards. And the main reason for that was ROG has this issue where it's like, it is very much like the best one of the best series of motherboards for LN2 overclocking, but at the same time they try to push for gamers. And so when they make those Maximus 8 Extremes, you just get like there's a ton of LN2 features, but they can't get away with putting only 2 memory slots on it because it's also targeted at gamers. Now with the Maximus IX Apex, sorry, we finally get a motherboard that's just all about that LN2 overclocking. I mean, you can tell it's all about the LN2 because this audio section is pretty much gone. You know, like on the regular ROG, on the other ROG boards, like this whole area of the board would be all audio section. Now the audio section is shoved in here, and you can see that all of the traces for that just like barely squeeze by that area. So yeah, it's a pure LN2 board. We got 4 PCIe slots by 16, so you can run a 4-way setup off of this Crossfire setup. You can't run SLI on it because it doesn't do. There's not a PLX chip on the board, so you can only do like 8x, 4x, 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 or I think 8x, 4, 8, 4. I'm not sure. I'll know that for sure when I actually get the board, but for now I'm going with 8, 4, 4, 4 because that's the only one I'm aware of so far, though I guess the Kaby Lake chipset has more PCIe slots. So yeah, we'll know for sure when I get the board. So this is, you know, a great option because it can do 4-way, and 4-way is fun. At least in Crossfire, because you can't do SLI. So yeah, this is just like a pure LN2 board. You can also notice that the other thing is the heat sinks are, like, there's no extra garbage on the board. There's no stupid I/O cover, there's no armor or anything. And that really helps for LN2 because you only have to remove this heatsink, that heatsink, and this heatsink when you want to insulate the motherboard, which is a huge deal because otherwise insulating is kind of a pain in, you know, it takes much longer than it should. There's also no armor on like the memory slots, so you can actually insulate between them pretty easily. Yeah, it's very much a motherboard designed purely for LN2. Other thing is like you only have 4 SATA ports instead of like 6 or 8. It's an LN2 board. It is everything I ever wanted from an LN2 motherboard, and I am super excited because I will be getting one of these in person, so we'll get to take it for, like, I'll get to take it for a spin on air cooling, on water cooling, on LN2, tear the whole board down, take a look at the VRMs. I'm going to guess that it's going to be a full international rectifier power stage setup under that heatsink, probably 3555s. So yeah, I'm just super excited about this board, as you can probably tell, because it looks freaking awesome, and unless there's some horrific BIOS bugs, it should be just like the best board for LN2 ever. So that covers, no, that doesn't cover. So yeah, I'll be covering this motherboard, and for the rest of Kaby Lake, I will also be doing other Kaby Lake motherboards because, as I said, the i3 7350K is coming out, and it's going to be a great like budget LN2 CPU in my opinion. So we need to do some budget LN2 overclocking. Which I sort of do with the FX series, but I'm going to admit that with the FX CPUs, they're not really competitive. There's not really that many benchmarks you would want to run on most FX chips, unless you're doing like the A350, because that one has a lot of hardware points behind it. But generally, it's like if you're benching FX CPUs, you're kind of screwed because there's not a lot of points in them. With the i3 7350K, it's easy to benchmark because it's Kaby Lake, no cold bug, no thermal paste crack, none of the, like, it's not very hard to handle. It shouldn't be very hard to handle on LN2. It's cheap, and it's competitive in terms of performance. You can take 2-core Cinebench, well, basically all of the multi-threaded benchmarks in their 2-core flavor, you can go take those out with the i3. It'll be very competitive in those categories. It'll be competitive in the single-threaded categories like SuperPi. So there's no real issues there either. Basically, the i3 is just going to be a great architecture to, well, great CPU for LN2 overclocking if you're just starting out, because it's cheap, and it doesn't have any major issues like with LN2 overclocking. So then the question is like what motherboard you should pair it with. So I will be trying my best to review as many sort of mid-range to acceptably priced Z270 motherboards. And basically my only criteria for considering something LN2 ready is like, is the VRM not crap? Are there the BIOS options I need? And does it have the buttons and a postcode? Especially the postcode is more important than necessarily the buttons, but you get the idea. So I will be trying to cover some mid-range Z270 boards to basically sort of cover that. So you can be excited for that. And overall, I'll just be trying to cover more motherboards this year because the channel is now sort of growing and getting motherboard photos has always been a nightmare. So, like, even worse than getting GPU PCBs. Motherboards, like most sites, never take the heatsink off of them. So, yeah. So I will be covering motherboards now, hopefully for Kaby Lake and for Zen. So that covers that. Other hardware that's coming in. I'm going to be getting an RX 480 Strix from Asus. It's a loaner card, so you won't be seeing me put it on LN2 because Asus wants the card working when I send it back and not covered in Plastidip and without wires hanging off of all the voltage controllers. So I will only be doing the sort of like we'll do an unboxing style thing and take a look at the card and how it's built up, tear it down, and also I'll do a written review of the graphics card detailing the thermal performance and the PCB design in more detail. So yeah, you have that to look forward to. So that'll be nice because now the GTR will actually have something to like compare itself to. I really don't like that. It's like if I review one graphics card, then it's like, what do you compare it to? Because like, yeah, you could try compare it against other review sites, but their test methodology might not be the same as mine, and then it's just totally invalid. So, last thing on the list, Zen is coming, and I'm super excited for Zen, but I've been super excited for Zen for a while now. So, I think let's first go over that most recent rumor about Zen. And I should have planned this better, but let's see if I can make this work. Oops. No. Oops. Okay, wait. Oh, wait. Okay, screw that. Give me a second. Did not prepare all of the tabs I needed. Ugh. Where did it go? There we go. So, and I probably should be linking to the Reddit post. Whatever, screw it. Actually, no, screw it. I won't show you that post. I'll just show you the relevant part. Anyway, so recently we've been listening to somebody from Reddit found an Easter egg in the Canard PC magazine's preview thing. Well, basically they published an article about Zen, and in there was a bit of binary above one of the images, which looks like a really crappy sort of, styling choice, but actually it's an Easter egg. If you threw that into a binary to text converter, it would basically say Zen can hit 5 gigahertz on air cooling. I'm very sorry to say, but that is just not going to happen. At least it's not going to happen at any voltage and core count that's actually practically usable. It's just not going to happen, okay? Just no. What I can tell you, well, actually I can't tell you because, not allowed to say, but what I can show you is what this guy here is claiming. So he's claiming Zen will be able to do 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz on all cores. I'd take his word for it, partly because I'm saying that you should take his word for it, and also because this guy works at one of the really large hardware publications in the Czech Republic. He almost certainly has a Zen CPU in his hands right now. Well, in his possession, not necessarily in his hands, but he definitely has a Zen CPU to play with. So if he says 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz, you should take his freaking word for it. Now you might be like, well, 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz is garbage. Yes, but you have to consider that Zen is an 8-core CPU competing against the 6900K. If we look at how the 6900K clocks, then we will notice that it clocks like absolute garbage, a lot like Zen does. So 4.2, 4.4, 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5 gigahertz. This is the only bins that Silicon Lottery sells. So Silicon Lottery, for those who aren't aware of them, this is a site that goes and bins CPUs for clock speed. So yeah, I actually have a CPU from them. My 4790K is from them. So that was more like I got it because I got a nice discount on it. But yeah, so they sell pre-bin CPUs, and as you can clearly see, they only bin the 6900K for 4.2 to 4.5 gigahertz. And if we look at the spec on the 4.5, which is not found, does it even? Okay, so the 4.5 is currently unavailable. Let's see if we can get the 4.4. Yeah, okay, so the spec on the 4.4, 1.36 V-core. So that's about the top of what a 6900K will do. That's 4.4 gigahertz right there. Zen is going to clock like that, right? And we already know from the Horizon demo that Zen more or less has the same IPC as Broadwell. It's very close. I'm not going to say it's right on top of it because the 6900K they had running in that demo did have boost enabled, so we don't know if the clock was 3.2 gigahertz or 3.4 gigahertz for all cores, because actually I think it might go up to 3.5. I'm not sure. I don't have a 6900K. I don't know how its boost profiles are set up. But it was going up against a 3.4 gigahertz Ryzen chip, and that Ryzen chip basically destroyed it in Handbrake by like 7%. 10 or, well, can't remember right now. I think it was, okay, let's just round up, 10%. So, you know, the Ryzen chip just destroyed it in Handbrake, and in Blender, they pretty much finished right on top of each other. 8 cores, 16 threads versus another 8 cores, 16 threads, unless AMD has a vastly superior, simultaneous multi-thread implementation than Intel, there is no way that AMD is getting those kinds of numbers with a vastly inferior instructions per clock rate. Okay, so, and I really doubt AMD just, built their first ever architecture with simultaneous multi-thread and has a better simultaneous multi-thread than Intel. That's just preposterous if you think about it. Intel has been working on the simultaneous multi-thread technology since the Pentium 4, I think, because that thing was terrible, and so one of the ways to compensate for it was we'll put simultaneous multi-thread, because the way that works is if the core, if there's unused resources in a CPU core, it allows the memory controller to shove another instruction through it while the core is basically idling and waiting for some other thread to get all of its stuff running. So simultaneous multi-thread was, yeah, it basically uses unused core resources, and it is very much a memory controller intensive sort of function. So I really, really doubt AMD can do simultaneous multi-thread better than Intel if they've never done it before, which means that their cores have to be pretty strong to get that kind of performance we saw on the Horizon stream, even if they were clocked 200 megahertz for both tests. 200 megahertz higher for both tests. And that's assuming turbo boost on the Intel CPU didn't work at all, which I really, really doubt. I think for the Handbrake test, which does use the AVX instruction set, the Intel might have been clocking down to 3.2 gigahertz, but for the Blender test, it was definitely, almost certainly running with boost at like 3.5, 3.4 gigahertz. So I think that one basically shows us that Ryzen and Broadwell E are right on top of each other IPC-wise, and based on that comment right here, they're also right on top of each other clockwise. So yeah, it's like you basically get a cheap 6900K in the form of an 8-core Zen CPU. And I'm saying cheap because, well, I know it's going to be cheap, but I can't tell you how cheap. But do consider these things. Zen doesn't really have much of a chipset, okay? So the motherboards are going to be cheaper than like X99 boards. Also, X99 has a 4-channel memory controller, which means there's a shitload of traces going through the motherboard to wire up all those memory slots. More traces mean more PCB layers. More PCB layers directly translate into higher motherboard costs. So Zen is going to have cheaper motherboards. Zen doesn't have that, as complex a memory controller as the Broadwell E's do. So that's also cheaper. I think it also has overall less PCIe lanes. Not 100% sure on that. I didn't really look into it that much because Crossfire doesn't really that, like, Crossfire will run and work on basically 4x4 3.0 as long as they're for all 4 GPUs. So yeah, and you can't really run 4-way SLI anyway, so it's not like it's relevant for the SLI people. But yeah, so you have slightly less PCIe. It's on PGA, so PGA is also cheaper to implement than LGA. PGA being the pins on CPU instead of pins on motherboard. What else is there? Well, yeah, overall, Zen is basically designed to be a very nice consumer architecture, whereas all of the Broadwell-y stuff is server chips that got axed because they didn't meet binning requirements, or Intel just needs to sell more 6900Ks. That's the thing a lot of people, I think, don't realize about Intel binning policy, is if Intel gets a batch of like too many CPUs can all be really good, they're not going to drop the price of the really good CPU, they're just going to axe the good cores anyway. So you can end up with like i7, like a 6-core i7 where 2 of the cores are actually perfectly fine. They're just axed because, well, the market didn't, there was too much demand for 6 cores, not enough demand for 8 cores, so they just chopped off the 2 extra cores and made it a 6-core. So yeah, so the Intel prices are very heavily influenced by the fact that originally all of the Broadwell-y stuff is server CPUs. Okay, there's a lot of stuff on those CPUs that Zen doesn't have because Zen doesn't need it, which lowers the costs. So Zen is going to be very, very, very cheap. Also, Intel marks up all of their high-end CPUs to like not destroy profit margins on the Xeon end, because that's another issue. If like you consider the fact that you can overclock all the high-end desktop i7s, a lot of the Xeons only win on power efficiency in certain scenarios, which means for certain scenarios, the Xeons really, really suck. And that would be like, you know, small-scale production. Like, if you're a small-scale production and you're not building a server farm, you could get away with running an overclocked 6900K instead of getting a 16-core Xeon, as long as the 6900K is clocked high, like as long as the Xeon you were looking at is clocked low enough. So that's why actually Intel's pricing is always so ridiculous. It's because they're not going like, oh, we're worried about AMD's CPUs eating into our margins. No, they're like, if we price these i7s any lower, it'll start having negative impacts on the Xeon lineup. So the i7 stuff is really, really expensive for basically those reasons, and Zen doesn't really have those issues because AMD's not worried about Intel's profit margins, so they can get away with pricing the Zen CPUs in such a way that it basically just completely destroys the Broadwell-E lineup. Now, what I will say is we also know that there's going to be like a 6-core and a 4-core Zen. A lot of people are hoping that those will clock better. I'm very, very sorry to say CPUs generally don't clock better if they have less cores. And to prove that, let's go back to Silicon Lottery. So here we have the 6900K. 4.5 is the highest bin, currently unavailable. This is 4.4, and that's 36% of CPUs can do 4.4. Let's take a look at the 6950X. What kind of bins do we have? 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, right? It doesn't have the 4.5 bin, and 4.4, 24%. So that's a 10% decrease for 2 whole extra cores, right? There's 10% less CPUs that can hit 4.4 with 10 cores instead of 8 cores. And if we go down to, like, say, a 6850K, which actually they've been up to a 4.6, but if we take a look at the 4.4 and the 4.5, we'll try to find one with the similar statistic. 61, yeah, so 6850Ks clock a lot better. Yeah, and 28. So basically, you get 100 megahertz extra for like 4 cores less, right? Because this is a 6-core right here. And then if we go down to the 6800K, let me just get to that one. You will notice that you have 4.2, 4.4, 4.5, but the 4.4s are 34% again. So the 6850Ks are slightly higher, you know, slightly higher quality, but basically all of the, like, there's no massive gain in clocks. So if this comment right here is to be believed, and I think it is to be believed, then you know, he's talking about 8-core Zen. If we're going to look at 2-core, like 4-core Zen, at best it's going to be doing 4.6 gigahertz, which is a bit of an issue considering that Kaby Lake hits 5 gigahertz very, very easily. Okay? So if you want really high single-threaded performance, Kaby Lake is still pretty much going to be a win. I think the main win for Zen is that you now have good levels of IPC and you have cheap multi-threading. Like this, Zen pretty much, if you have a 5930K, an 8-core Zen is a great upgrade for you. Like me, I'm going to be probably replacing my 5930K with the Zen CPU, assuming that I can, well, I might end up buying one, but I'm kind of hoping that I'll get a free sample. I'm not 100% certain. I do want to have a Zen CPU for review usage, so that kind of causes issues because if the CPU is in my system, then it can't be used for reviews because, well, I don't want to deal with that. So I'd have to get 2 Zens, but I guess I can sell off the 5930K to sort of finance that. So yeah, so like if you have a 6-core Intel and move to an 8-core Zen, then you basically have better performance for video encoding, especially for like live streaming. It's great, which is why I'm considering it. It's also more power efficient. 95 watt TDP is really, really nice for Zen. And at 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz, if you don't want to balloon the TDP too much, you could just clock it to like 4.1, and you'd still get really, really good performance in multi-threading. Also, with 8 cores, it's great for 3D Mark. Zen is going to be just great for 3D Mark physics, because up until now, you pretty much if you want to be competitive in 3D Mark, you need at least a 5960X up till now. So that's like 5960X or a 6900K or a 6950X. Those are pretty much your only options if you want to be competitive at 3D Mark. Now with Zen, sure, it'll still be slower than like a good 5960X because good 5960Xs could hit like 4.8, 4.9 gigahertz on water cooling. Zen will probably, like if you force it, you might be able to get 4.5, 4.6 for benchmarks. And at those clocks, you will have like 6900K level IPC. So you will be just about, able to get within the same performance range as that 5960X running 4.8, 4.9. So overall, I think Zen is great for 3D Mark, and even better with Zen, Zen doesn't have a cold bug, which basically means if you're going to LN2 your Zen CPU, it's actually very easy to do because you just make sure that there's LN2 in the LN2 pot and don't give a damn about temperatures. Well, that's the wrong way to do it. You should actually, monitor temperatures and make sure that there's no failure of thermal paste, which can occur if you have a really high wattage CPU, which an 8-core Zen CPU, I mean, there's still 95 watt TDP chips at stock, but the thing is, under LN2, power consumption tends to shoot through the freaking roof. Okay, so if you're going to be LN2ing a Zen, it's going to be easier than like Broadwell E, where Broadwell E has a ridiculously high cold bug. Most Broadwell E's are run at around minus 90, minus 70. I mean, on dry ice, Broadwell E clocks basically the same as it does on LN2. So Broadwell E doesn't really like LN2. Zen has no cold bug. You should be able to run Zen on LN2 above 5 gigahertz very, very easily. So it's perfect for 3D Mark because you basically don't have to worry about the CPU. You just have to focus on the GPU. Which is nice. Admittedly, you still won't be breaking any world records, because to break world records, you do need a 6950X, just because, well, 10 cores versus 8 cores. Unless Zen could hit 6 gigahertz, it's not beating a 6950X. And I know it won't do 6, not on all 8 cores at least. So it's still very capable though. Like, I'm excited for Zen. I'm definitely gonna do a 3D Mark session with the Zen CPU just to see how it does, because on LN2 obviously, because, well, holy crap, we finally have a competitor to the 8 cores from Intel. So that's great. The 4 cores and the 6 cores, it's like, if you need the extra multi-threaded performance, sure. I'm not sure that the 4-core Zen will be an i5 killer, because the Kaby Lake i5s will be hitting 5 gigahertz. That's just a fact. And that could sort of skew some, like if you have a game that only runs on 4 cores, it's going to prefer 4 cores at 5 gigahertz over 4 cores at 4.4 gigahertz. It's really that simple. Though these days it's actually getting better, and now, so yeah, who knows? I'm not 100% certain on that, but I think but the other thing is a lot of people won't necessarily overclock that far, and I think like for similar clocks, I'm going to say Zen is going to be better than i5. But if you clock the i5 as high as it'll go, then yeah, Zen will have a bit of an issue as far as I'm concerned, unless it's priced really like lower than the i5s, or like below the 7600K is pretty much where I would expect to see it in terms of just sort of where it would make a lot more sense from a performance standpoint. If we look at it just from a pure pricing standpoint, I think AMD could get away with pricing it identical to a 6600K, though I kind of suspect they might not do that. I didn't ask very much about the 4 cores because I honestly don't care about them, so yeah. So that sort of covers this. This video is now 30 minutes long, so I think that's a good time to end it. Hopefully I will still be here in a week or when Zen launches, because I'm not sure that I don't think I violated anything I agreed to. I mean, I didn't agree to anything, but there's still that chance of an unmarked red van rolling up to my door and taking me away. So, yeah, be excited for 2017, because it's the year of no cold bugs and very, very affordable gigahertz. That's for sure. And cores. So, yeah, I'm excited. You should be excited, and see you whenever I actually get around to doing all that content, as well as all the usual stuff like PCB breakdowns and So yeah, that's that. So with that all out of the way, I have a Patreon. You can find it down in the description. It would be awesome if you chose to donate, because then it, I can fund LN2 and my electricity bill and stuff like that with all the donations, as well as acquiring GPUs and parts and all that. And you should also subscribe if you haven't. And there's also the little bell on the subscription thing, because YouTube has gone insane. So if you want to get notified about everything I ever post, you need to press that bell thing, because yeah, it's apparently not enough to just subscribe these days. And if you would really like to help out the channel, you can share this video with everybody you know. Share it with your grandma, share it with your dog, share it with your little brother who really doesn't watch this, doesn't want to watch it. I don't care. More views, more better. So that's that for this one, and see you guys next time.